Hello everyone, and welcome to question 6 of the Plant Reproduction series. In this video, we'll be working through the Eastern Cape 2024 Provincial November exam. This question is worth 11 marks. Question 2.3 presents us with a diagram showing pollination in flowering plants. We are given flower 1 and flower 2, and we are also given a pollinating agent. The fact that there are two different flowers shows us that it is cross-pollination. Now that is something that you should make a mental note of. Had it been one flower, it would have been self-pollination. We are also given a pollinating agent, and this type of pollinating agent is an insect. Right, so let's go through the labels. Label A is pointing to the anther, which is part of the male reproductive system. Label B is pointing to the sepal. Label C is pointing to the petals. Label D is pointing to the stigma, which is the surface onto which the pollen will land. Label E is pointing to the style, which is the narrow tube that the pollen tube will grow down. And then we're also given the ovary. The ovary is labeled, and the pollen grains are also labeled. Now, I'd like you to pause the video and then answer the questions. Right. Question 2.3.1a asks you to identify the pollinating agent in the above process. This would be a bee. You can also just say an insect. Identify the type of pollination represented. This is cross-pollination. Notice how the tick is after the word cross because it's important that you specify the type of pollination. If you had only said pollination, that would not be correct. 2.3.2, write down the letter and name of the structure that A, attracts the pollinating agent. Now, that would be the petal, which is label C. Write down the letter and name of the structure that has a protective function. That would be B, the sepal. Note that for this question, you are asked to write down the letter and the name, which is why this question is worth 4 marks. 1 mark for the letter, 1 mark for the name. 2.33, describe the events that occur when pollen lands on part D. Now, pollen contains the male gamete, and it is coming from the anther. Part D is the stigma. It is the surface onto which the pollen will land. Now, you should keep in mind that the end result is that we want to form a fruit. So let's think about how that happens. The pollen grain lands on the stigma. It then grows a pollen tube which germinates down the style, which is label E. The way I like to explain it to my class is that the pollen arrives in style. The pollen goes down in style. So the style is that narrow tube that the pollen grain will germinate down. Once it goes down the pollen tube, it will then reach the ovary, which contains the ovules. The ovules contain the eggs, and inside the eggs, inside the ovules is where fertilization will take place. So this is when the haploid sperm will fertilize a haploid egg, and together they will form a diploid zygote. And this happens inside the ovary. The fertilized ovule will now become the seed, and the ovary wall will become the fruit. So that is something that you need to know. The ovule becomes the seed, the ovary becomes the fruit. When you look at an apple, if you were to cut an apple in half, the brown seeds that you see at the center were once the ovule, and the fruit that you are eating was once the ovary. Question 2.3.4, give one characteristic in the offspring produced by these plants that would enable them to survive harsh changing environments. That is genetic variation. How do we know it's genetic variation? Because number 1, it is cross-pollination, and number 2, there are 2 different plants involved. The pollen grain is leaving the anther of one plant and is transferred to the stigma of a different plant. Now count your ticks and give yourself a mark out of 11, and then we can move on to the next question. Thank you.